Good morning. We're going to see how this goes. I'm going to try to do a narration with this PowerPoint. Forgot about the fancy music. So the idea is I'm just going to talk through the notes, kind of like I would if I was there. Probably a little bit quicker than some of y'all would prefer. But did already post this PowerPoint and actually all of the PowerPoints that are related to this unit on Canvas. So if you feel like you need to go back and write down every word and I went too fast for you, then you can jump on Canvas and do that. But I wanted to at least try to talk through stuff so we don't fall too far behind. So we'll see how much of this I get through, and we will just kind of pick up from there. So today is all about starting the age of exploration. And so to have a little bit of context of what we're talking about, please remember I said what's crazy about the beginning of AP Euro is that the first 3 units are all happening at the exact same time. So be careful not to think that what we call the age of exploration happens after the Renaissance just because we talked about that first. The Renaissance sparks the age of exploration, sparks the Protestant Reformation, sparks the scientific revolution, which becomes the Age of Enlightenment, but they're all layered right on top of each other. And once you start really looking at those years, that becomes very obvious. So the context of this time period is the same context that led us to the Renaissance. We're coming out of these dark ages, medieval Europe, where they really didn't have much to contribute to international trade. The most desired goods are coming out of Asia for the most part: spices, tea, silk, porcelain, gemstones, and also a little bit from Africa, especially salt and gold. And they're being brought into Europe over land. There are boats, obviously, but the trade done with boats is generally by river or within small seas, just kind of bouncing between Greece and Italy and things like that. So if you want to trade, if you want goods from Asia, it has to be done over land by the Silk Road. And obviously that's going to take a very long time. It's going to be potentially very dangerous, and that's all fine. But what's really annoying is the fact that if you are traveling by road, you have to cross through the Ottoman Empire. And as I stated when we were talking about why the Renaissance started in Italy, this has enabled the Ottoman Empire to become very rich. They are charging tolls to use their roads. They're charging tariffs to bring in trade items. And frankly, Europe's just getting sick of it, because the more they get away with it, the more they're pushing that envelope and increasing their prices. So we reach this time period where people are really anxious to find a new way to trade, and they're also imbued with this new sense of exploration and wonder and desire to see what's out there in the world. That's coming from that humanism and individualism of the Renaissance. And so when you start getting new inventions that will allow us to travel further by boat, that's what's going to jumpstart the age of exploration. So in the beginning, we're just going to kind of talk about those motives in detail, and then we will get into kind of how it impacts and obviously changes the world forever. I guess I could have put this up too. Sorry. Ooh, fancy sounds. So dramatic. So, if it boils down to it, you can pretty much sum everything up into religious zeal or economic interest. Although I kind of like to go back to elementary school. The thing about history in elementary school is when you relearn it in high school, you sit there and go, well, that was dumb. But really, it's kind of, breaking things down to those basic things. So if you remember learning about Christopher Columbus and the other explorers in elementary school, you were probably taught the 3 G's. People went out, explored for gold, God, and glory. And honestly, it's not wrong. We just need to get much deeper into what we mean by gold, God, and glory, because gold doesn't always mean actual gold. But in this case, we sum it up as religious zeal or economic interest, although I think you could make that argument for glory too, that sometimes it's just about being the first to do something. And this is right here an example of that. The European monarchs aren't the ones that are going out and doing the physical exploring, with one notable exception, although he doesn't go too far. But they are quite happy to pay people to go out and explore for them. 2 reasons for this. That glory part, the prestige of being the first country to accomplish something, but then the power. We are entering into a time period where land determines power. Colonies determine power, because the more colonies you have, the more natural resources you have. The more natural resources you have, the more other people need your help, and you don't need their help. The goal is to be self-sufficient, to have as many colonies as you need to have access to all the natural resources that you could possibly want. So going through, and once we've discovered ocean travel, sailing to the Americas, to Africa, to Asia, to eventually Australia, and snatching up that land in the name of your king increases the prestige for your monarch. So when we talk about God being a driving force, the one story that we're always force-fed as American children in school is about the Pilgrims. And the Pilgrims came to America to escape religious persecution and blah, blah, blah. And there's some truth to that, although, they're not exactly the heroic refugees, that's the word I wanted, that we learn about in elementary school. But it's not just about religious freedom. Sometimes it's about religious subjugation, about forcing people to adopt your form of Christianity. So both for personal freedom and to force religion, both make Christianity a driving force for exploration. Ooh, fancy world spinning with the cross. And we talked a little bit about the spread of Christianity through Europe, I think literally on like day one. How obviously it's coming up from the Middle East because that's where Jesus of Nazareth lived, and then the church was started after his execution and then spreads up into Europe. So by the time we get to 1492, which should be obvious why that's sticking in your head, Christianity is obviously taking control. We've talked about all that. And then, so as we said, they're going to try to spread their faith globally. And this is where it's very clear that we're intermixing with Unit 2. I keep mentioning it even though we haven't gotten there yet. The whole point of Unit 2 is that people are going to start to break away from the Catholic Church. And so that's why certain countries like Spain and Italy are going to use exploration to try to force Catholicism, in other areas in order to kind of re-bolster up those numbers. So this is what we use the term missionary. If you've never heard missionary before, they are people who go out specifically to spread faith, and they are specifically spreading Catholicism. We're going to talk about these other Protestant religions that develop. They don't really feel the need to go push their religion, which is why the vast majority, and I won't say never, but at this exact moment, the vast majority of missionaries are going to be Catholic, and the vast majority of missionaries are going to come from Spain. some from Portugal, some from France. But really, Spain is a driving force in pushing Catholicism on the New World, especially in the Americas, bringing that and just making it a big goal. In fact, a group is formed called the Jesuits. And there we go, right there. Francis of Loyola creates the Jesuits, also known as the Society of Jesus. And they are specifically part of the Catholics' attempt to fight the Protestant Reformation. They are an order of priests specifically created to go out into the world and conduct missionary work. And so some of the things they do are decent in their mind. I mean, of course, the most decent thing would have been to just leave the people alone, right? But they do go in and build schools and universities and try to educate. But it's all done with a very healthy serving of, and you will be Catholic or die. Not much choice is given there. And this is mainly the Spanish coming through and just shoving Catholicism down the throats of any group they come across. So while the Spanish, and to some degree the Portuguese, are really going for religious reasons, although they're not going to be upset when they find lots of gold, don't get me wrong. The Dutch and the English never even really go in with religion in mind. Both of these areas have switched to Protestantism, and religion's just not really a driving force for them. They're very into business, into finding these natural resources, finding markets for their manufactured goods. So they're much more focused on the commercial aspects rather than the religious. As we said, the Puritans, the Quakers, they will go to the Americas and set up their own little colonies to get away from the Anglican Church. And that's part of, Henry VIII choosing this new religion and forcing people to be Anglican. And we'll get much more detail into that next unit. That's basically what I just said. Using their religion to justify. There's this whole mindset, obviously born out of very deep-rooted racism, that these cultures that they're encountering are less than. They are not as traditionally educated. They don't have access to the same materials. I mean, you can't have developed metal weaponry if you don't have access to metal, right? That's not an indicator of education or progress. But of course, that's how the Europeans are going to take it. So they consider it their Christian duty to civilize the masses, if you will. And they justify it to themselves like, oh, but we're helping them into the kingdom of God. And people can use religion to justify a lot of acts. The Spanish in particular are extremely brutal to the indigenous people that they encounter. I can't remember which block it was that I mentioned it, but it was not uncommon for the Spanish to feed babies, indigenous babies, to their dogs and things like that to keep the people fearful and following orders. And so they use religion to create terror and form society the way they want it to be in the New World. Yes, that's what I just said. So economic motives are basic and I think easy to understand. Obviously, gold is a huge driving force. And this comes out of the fact that the Spanish find gold. That's very exciting. And all of a sudden, everyone else is like, hey, cool, we want gold too. But that's not even, the gold is the cherry on top. But like I said, the original economic motivator is these new trade routes. How can we get the goods we want from Asia without having to pay the Ottoman Empire their taxes? How can we just scoot around? So all the people who struck out in the beginning to go exploring, they are looking for a route to Asia. Nobody knows that North and South America exist. If we look at a map from this time period, it is Europe, Africa, and Asia. That's it. And so every attempt, regardless of what direction they sailed, they were trying to get to India. They were trying to get to other parts of Asia. There's no thought process in the beginning about going to the Americas because they don't know they're there. So how can we get the goods we want without dealing with the Ottoman Empire? Right. And so we know this. We already have exposure to Africa and Asia. And a big part of that is because of this dude, Marco Polo. And this is way predating our curriculum. He is like 1200s. But he had traveled to China, and that's kind of what had opened this trade between Asia and Europe. So again, we know they know about spices and silks and jewels, but it's hard to get to them. This is all kind of stuff we've talked about. This is showing the Ottoman Empire, and you can just see like how easy it is for them to control trade into Europe. They very systematically took control of all these coastlines. So it would be very difficult to bring items into Europe from Asia without crossing their path somewhere. And yes, you could argue they could scoot all the way through Africa and come up across the Strait of Gibraltar into Spain. But this is in Africa at this time is very dense vegetation, the jungle. People don't know how to, I shouldn't say people, Europeans don't know how to traverse the Sahara, which obviously is right on top, or the jungle if you try to go down around the Sahara. They're not capable of dealing with that. So that's why that's not really an option. Yeah, Ottoman Empire controlled trade. So Venice, we talked about, our powerful cities in Italy. We've talked about Milan. We've talked about Florence. Venice is the only Europeans with direct access to Muslim ports. So that's one of the reasons that they become very wealthy. But again, if you're anyone other than Venice, you're looking for another way. Lovely spices that somehow England never ends up using in their food. So, bypassing Ottoman control. Listen to the water. Just sit here for a moment with peaceful sounds. Shipping goods by water is cheaper and easier than overland. That's another a big duh that if you sit there and think about it, how much can you carry over land? I mean, think about this pre-train, pre-truck world. They're literally like on camels. So how much can you bring back by land versus one of these big ships? So that's another reason that trading by water would be much more beneficial. So I'm saying they want a route to Asia. See the highlighted countries, Spain and Portugal, because that's where it's all going to kick off from. So the Portuguese actually do it first. And I might be jumping ahead of my slides because I haven't looked all the way through them all yet, but that's okay. If I say it now and we see it later, just, reiterating. The Portuguese are the ones who do this first. And the reason Portugal has a jump start on everyone else is because of a prince, Prince Henry the Navigator. Prince Henry was one of those not crown princes. He wasn't first in line for the throne. And so if you were a prince but you weren't first in line, you kind of had to do something with your time. Some of them would go into the military, some would, be advisors to their father. Henry decided he wanted to be an explorer. And so he got his boat and he started sailing up and down the coastline of West Africa. And he actually settled ports, trading posts for Portugal, all around that protruding area of West Africa and a little bit down. And he started mutually beneficial trading relationships with a lot of the African communities in West Africa. And he always thought that he would, be the one to go out and do this crazy exploration, try to make it all the way to India. But for some reason, he just decided he didn't have it in him. He wasn't ready to commit to something like that. So he decided to pull back and he returned to Portugal and he actually opened a school. He basically said, hey, if you want to be an explorer, come to me and I will train you. And so he trained a bunch of the guys that ended up actually succeeding and going further than he did. And so one of those guys was a guy named Vasco da Gama. And Vasco da Gama ends up being the first actual maritime explorer to get somewhere. He left Portugal and he sailed down around the bottom of Africa, which is now known as the Cape of Good Hope, and he made it all the way to India. And so, and I know this map doesn't show a route all the way there, but if you just mentally can imagine leaving from Portugal, going down around Europe, and then back up to India, it kind of makes a V, a really sloppy V, but still a V, V for Vasco da Gama. So Portugal has the first explorers. They have Henry the Navigator to help with navigation. And then Vasco da Gama is the first one who makes it to India. Jumping forward, a little bit of foreshadowing. When we go not a couple hundred years, maybe just 100 years down the line, and slavery, Africa-based slavery, starts to become a thing, Portugal becomes the first country to take advantage of the situation and become very wealthy. They really are controlling the slave trade for a good chunk of time. And the reason that they are able to do so is because of these ports that Prince Henry the Navigator had created. And I think it's just one of those crazy things of history because I think, I don't know the guy, he's dead, but I think Henry would have been very disappointed to learn, what ended up happening with his trading ports because he was very proud of developing these cooperative relationships with these West African communities. I don't think he would have foreseen how his ports ended up helping Portugal become rich later. Okay. So Spain. So Spain has this guy, Christopher Columbus. I'm going to wait. I think he's going to come up on his own. We'll talk about his dumb butt when we get to his slide. I wish I was in person so you can see how excited I got. This is my favorite word in the AP European History curriculum. We're going to learn this. You're going to understand this because so many things are going to revert back to this concept. Mercantilism. Feudalism is dying. Mercantilism is being born. Mercantilism is the economic system of our new monarchs and eventually our absolute monarchs. See if the next slide shows some things before I start talking about it. But mercantilism is our word of the day. There we go. So the whole point of mercantilism is the fact that there is only so much gold and silver in the world. It is a finite resource. Our money today, if we're honest, it's not real. It's paper. And somebody told us that this amount of paper is equal to the amount of work that we did. And our numbers, when we have money in the bank and we spend it, it's all just fake. It's digital. And so when the country is in economic crisis, they can print more money or they can take money out. It's not physically based on anything, if that makes sense. At the time, in this time period of mercantilism, wealth is based on gold and silver. And there is only so much gold and silver in the world. When it has all been found and it has all been allocated, that's it. So the idea of mercantilism is I need to get my hands on as much gold and silver as possible, because if I don't have it, somebody else does. And I don't want that. So my country's wealth and therefore power is based on how much gold and silver I have. Where this comes into play with colonies is what I mentioned earlier about being self-sufficient. The goal of mercantilism is to be self-sufficient. That is such an important point for everyone to get. The goal of mercantilism is to be self-sufficient. If I have colonies that have all the natural resources that I need, I don't need any other European country. If I don't have a colony that has what I need, let's say I have all these colonies, but none of them have cotton. I need cotton. Cotton is a wonderful thing. If I don't have a colony that produces cotton, I am going to have to trade for that cotton. I'm going to have to go to another European country that does have a cotton producing colony. And in order to get cotton, I'm going to have to give them some of my gold and silver, presuming that there's not something that they also need from me. Of course, if there is, we can trade resources. But they're trying to be self-sufficient too, so they probably have those resources. I don't want to have to buy from anybody. I don't want to have to rely on anybody's relationship with anybody. So in this time period, these European countries are snatching up as many colonies as possible so that they can take those natural resources. They're going to take those natural resources back to the mother country, whether it's England or Spain or France, and they are going to manufacture goods. They take cotton and they make clothes. They take wood and make furniture. They take iron and make steel. And then not only am I going to sell my goods within my own country, I'm going to sell my goods back to those colonies that I got the natural resources from, and I'm going to force those colonies to buy only from me. So I pay them pennies on the dollar for their resources, then force them to buy back those manufactured goods at whatever I want to charge. Zero care for the colonies, zero thought for the people living there. This is completely selfish, self-centered, and a power push for the European countries. All right, self-sufficient is the goal. I need colonies for natural resources so that I can accumulate as much gold and silver as possible. Very, very big point coming out of today. This is going to be the way economics in Europe works until we get to the 18th century, where we are going to be introduced to capitalism. But until we get to capitalism, mercantilism is going to run the show. Oh, see? Look. Now you just get it in a more dramatic fashion. Boom. Boom. That second one is actually a good point. I'm glad that popped up. How a country gets rich, and you could have hopefully discerned that from what I said, but just to say it plainly, we want to export more than we import. We don't want to have to buy from anyone else, but we love it if someone has to buy from us, right? So you export more than you import. That's how you get rich. Good life lesson for when y'all start working too. You want to earn more than you spend. Sounds very basic until that credit card's sitting in your hand. You get rich by earning more than you spend, by exporting more than you import. So once mercantilism becomes the goal of these governments, everything's going to center around this. So they're going to send out these explorers, not just people who want to explore and see what they find. They're going to send like these companies, and they're going to send finance guys, and they're going to send military to protect the colonies that they claim for themselves, and they're going to use this to justify everything they do, taking over areas and forcing them to follow trade rules. It's very Machiavellian. The ends justify the means. We're trying to get our country rich. Might have to break a few eggs to get it done. And then where it says free trade, that is the capitalism aspect coming in. But that is coming later. So how are we able to explore? It's all fine and dandy to talk about why we want to explore, but if it's so awesome, why hasn't it been done before? And that's the other part that the Renaissance. So the Renaissance is impacting our spirit and our desire for exploration. It's impacting the new monarchs, and that's why they're switching to this mercantilism idea. And then it's also just giving us a lot of new inventions that are super helpful. Right? Things that are going to help us not only with developing our maps, but also navigating. So these are our charts of different European ports. This is old school. This is pre our curriculum. I don't know how to read that or tell you what any of that means. But I can tell you that printing press, super dandy. Speaking of printing press, side check. If you go into Canvas, you'll see I didn't just put up the PowerPoints that we have actually used. I went in and put up the PowerPoints that are made by this creator from areas we've already talked about too, in case you want to look at those. There is a PowerPoint specifically about printing. I couldn't see myself spending 30 slides worth of time on the printing press, but it is in there if you want a little bit more background knowledge about the printing press. But obviously printing is awesome, and we're going to have more maps as a result. As is the case with 90% of European inventions in this time period, none of the new technology actually originates in Europe. It generally originates in the Middle East and in China, and then is adapted or just straight taken and used in Europe. The caravel. This is a big one. You will see this referenced a lot. It's just a big boat. It's a big boat that is better for the ocean. You know, that's one of the biggest reasons that ship travel has been limited to rivers and to seas, is just because the boats can't handle it. It's like Moana with her little raft when she was trying to get out in the ocean, and the ocean's like, nah, girl. It's like that. So now we have these big, quicker, heavier, oceany boats. The astrolabe and the quadrant are going to help with navigation. Do not ever ask me how one of those works. Go find an ROTC person. They're supposed to be all about the Navy, but it helps you navigate and find your place. Lateen sails are really big because I guess you can catch the wind in any direction. That's the thing that really sucks about sailboats. I mean, yeah, remember, we are pre any kind of engine. So you get out in the middle of the ocean and the wind dies, you're just stuck. That's why some of these journeys took like a year to cross the ocean. They'd just be sitting there for like 3 weeks waiting for a wind to come. But the lateen sails can help catch that wind. And then finally, a big help is going to be the compass, which will help them figure out which direction they're going, unless you're Christopher Columbus. So these are, again, you know, not necessarily all of them, but at least a couple of these to have in your pocket if you ever have to, you know, do an SAQ about why exploration started at this time period. New technologies such as the caravel and the compass are always good references to have. I'm sure some of y'all are still trying to write down every little green word, but it is on Canvas if you need it. And then gunpowder. Hopefully, and if you don't know, gunpowder is also a Chinese invention. So this is getting more into the impacts of exploration. I probably would have saved this slide for a little bit later. But one of the facts of life is that when populations that have never interacted with each other meet for the first time, things like germs are going to be shared. And what happens when the Spanish, and it will happen also with the English more north later, but really in the beginning, the Spanish land in the Caribbean and then eventually in Central America, modern day Mexico, South America, they introduce smallpox. And they introduce lots of diseases, the common cold, influenza, but smallpox is the one that just wreaks absolute havoc on the indigenous populations. They do not have any antibodies in their immune system to deal with this. And so a case that might, you know, put a European sick to bed for a couple weeks is just a killer. And in the end, almost 90% of the population is destroyed either through disease or violence. Usually the disease took the most of them. And it's really hard or really easy to conquer a place if, you know, everybody is sick when you're doing it. So that does help them, the Europeans, succeed. Okay, don't get too excited because I'm literally like halfway through. I'm like 3/4 through because I'm going to stop at an hour. But these are the key takeaways from the first part. We should know at this point that advances in navigation, cartography, and military technology enabled Europeans to establish overseas colonies and empires. You should be able to name at least two of those advances. The caravel, the astrolabe, the lateen sails, and the compass are the pictures that are there. We should know that Europeans are trying to get that gold and spices and luxury goods from Asia to Europe in order to increase wealth. I'm going to talk about that Spanish gold in a minute. That's going to be even more exciting. But originally, it's about those raw materials. And we should definitely understand the concept of mercantilism. I want everything. I want to be self-sufficient, and that's why I'm going to develop these commercial colonies overseas. And then finally, Christianity being a stimulus for exploration in the forcing of Catholicism to drive up numbers after the Protestant Reformation. Okay, so I don't know how much I'm going to get through this because I am only going to do a certain amount of time more, but we will try. So as these countries are all exploring, just like there's only so much gold and silver in the world, there's only so many colonies in the world. I mean, there's a lot that they can conquer, and they're going to try. But it does mean that we have a lot of rivalries developing between different countries. So this is going to be a little bit, we can go quickly through these because we literally just talked about it. Power, resources, and luxury goods. Competition and conflict over new territories and trade routes. Everybody wants to get rich. So Spain. Oh, Spain. So remember, Spain has been unifying. Remember our power couple, Ferdinand and Isabel, uniting Castile and Aragon. They also kicked out the Jewish people, and then they kicked out Muslim people, which is called the Reconquista, as in reconquering Spain for the Catholics. So they're feeling pretty high and mighty, feeling pretty proud of themselves. And so this made them want to start thinking about competing for trading colonies. And they do want, obviously this direct access to the spice trade. And so, and there's Isabel and Ferdinand there. And so they decide to invest. Well, I should wait to see what my slide says before I start talking about him. All right, so it's just early explorations in general. All right, this guy. So, Christopher Columbus is Italian. He's not Spanish. The reason he ends up sailing for Spain is because when he goes to the Italian leaders and explains what he wants to do, they basically laugh at him and say, go away, as do several other financiers. Because Christopher Columbus has this idea that he wants to sail west to get east. Remember, everyone's trying to get to India and China. That is everybody's goal. But he wants to sail around the other side. The thing that we get misinformation when we're little, is this concept that Christopher Columbus believed the world was round and everyone else thought the world was flat. And all his sailors thought they were going to sail off the edge of the world and get eaten by sea monsters. But Christopher Columbus was so brilliant, he knew the world was round. This is so wrong. Not true at all. By this point, the vast majority of people agreed and accepted that the world was round. Christopher Columbus's sailors did not think they were going to sail off the edge of the world. The thing is, Christopher Columbus did not believe the world was round. Christopher Columbus believed the world was shaped like a pear. Like a pear. Skinny on top, big bottom. And so his idea of how he was going to sail west to get east was that he was going to sail up to the skinny part of the world and scoot around the skinny part and then come back down into Asia. And he had to go to Spain to get somebody to believe in it. So fine, he got his ships, he's got his Nina and the Pinta and the Santa Maria, and they sail west. And they don't even really go up. Like, if you look at a map, he was a mess. He does not make it to Asia. He lands in the Caribbean. The Caribbean. I want to point out, for everybody's got a calendar that says Columbus Day in the United States, he never set foot here. He probably never even knew that it existed. He was always just in the Caribbean. Anyway, he lands there in Hispaniola. And he gets off the boat and he's like, hey, we're in India. Look, there are Indians. And his own men were instantly like, dude, this is not India. We've been to India. These people don't look like they're from India. They don't speak like they're from India. They don't dress like they're from India. We are not in India. Refused to consider the idea that he was wrong. Not only did he refuse that trip, he actually left. He took some people as captive slaves, went back to Spain. By the way, when he did that, he left a ton of his men there on the island and basically told them to just have fun, do whatever they wanted. These men raped and slaughtered the Taino natives to an insane degree, pretty much decimated the population. Christopher Columbus went back to Spain, came back. He made a total of 3 trips to the Caribbean and was never willing to admit that he was wrong and he was not in India. So why has this man got a holiday in the United States? Because a president about 100 years ago wanted to buy some Italian American votes and agreed to give Christopher Columbus a day because he was Italian, even though he's got nothing to do with America. And they could have given Amerigo Vespucci a day, the guy who actually mapped the coastlines. Whatever. Tangent. Christopher Columbus. He was there. He was the first. 1492, sailed the ocean blue, blah, blah, blah. So what happens as Portugal and Spain are both exploring, because once Christopher Columbus lands there for Spain, the Spanish ships just do not stop coming west. They just keep coming. Pizarro conquers Peru and Cortez conquers Mexico, and they just take over that entire area. Except Portugal has also decided to come over this direction, and they've settled in what's now Brazil. And so Spain and Portugal start to realize that they're going to be stepping on each other's toes a lot. And they have a pretty good relationship, and they don't want this to cause animosity or cause a war between these 2 European countries that are right next to each other. So they decide to sign something called the Treaty of Tordesillas in 1494. And the Treaty of Tordesillas basically divided the world in half. And they made this little fake line that kind of went, halfway through modern day Brazil. And they said everything east of that line belonged to Portugal, and everything west of that line belonged to Spain. How nice of them to ask the actual countries involved. Not at all. But that's what they did. And so Portugal basically agreed they were going to focus mainly on the Asian aspect, Indonesia, those areas. They're in India itself. And Spain is not going to mess with Asia. They're going to focus on the Americas. They're happy to do that because they have found a ton of gold. And Portugal's happy with the East because at this moment they control the spice trade. So they figure this is a good way to keep the relationship between the 2 countries solid and both get what they want out of it. So the Treaty of Tordesillas divides the world, separates the Spanish and Portuguese spheres of influence. There's my boy. See, honestly, I think Amerigo Vespucci should have gotten the holiday. He comes around and he basically explores the whole South American coast. He creates the maps. This is why we are called the Americas because of Amerigo Vespucci. It made so much more sense to have a Vespucci Day. I think I'm going to stop here because there's a lot of stories that go into this, and looking at the time, I'm already at about 50 minutes. I don't think I'll be able to do it justice. By this point, you should have already taken your quiz, so really there should only be like 5, maybe 10 minutes left in class, if that. So we're going to wrap up there. I will continue from here on Thursday. Please remember, after school tomorrow, just until about 3 o'clock, very short meeting, is the forensics meeting. Really trying to push you guys, and I'm going to try to get the juniors too. This is a fantastic team for LCSC, y'all, because it's not going to interfere with any of your other clubs or teams except for the little meeting tomorrow. And it looks really, really good on college applications. If you were planning to do Model UN, I know they're also having their meeting tomorrow. That's okay. Pick one and go to it. If you want to go to Model UN, I'm going to crash that meeting to try to recruit people as well. They're not going to interfere because, again, we can practice on your schedule. But please try to stay back for that if you're interested. Like I said, it'll be really quick. And that's it. And thanks for listening, and I will see y'all on Thursday. Have a good couple days.